I'm afraid I shall have to go, Holmes said one morning, as we sat down together to breakfast. Go, I asked. Go where? To Dartmoor, to King's Pyland. I wasn't surprised. In fact, my only real surprise was that he hadn't already involved himself in the case, which had by that point become the sole topic of conversation across the length and breadth of the country. For an entire day, my companion had wandered our sitting room, with his chin sunk on his chest and his brow furrowed, filling and refilling his pipe with the strongest black tobacco, entirely deaf to anything I said to him. Fresh editions of every newspaper had been sent up by our newsagent, only to be glanced through and tossed into a corner. Silent as he'd been, I knew perfectly well what occupied his thoughts. There was only one problem before the public capable of truly challenging his powers of analysis, and that was the singular disappearance of the favorite for the Wessex Cup, alongside the tragic murder of its trainer. When he finally announced his intention of heading down to the scene himself, it was exactly what I had hoped for and expected. I told him I would be glad to accompany him if I wouldn't be in the way. My dear Watson, he said, you'd be doing me a genuine favor by coming, and I don't believe your time will be wasted, since there are aspects to this case that promise to make it a genuinely unique one. We have just enough time to catch our train at Paddington, and I'll go into the matter further once we're aboard. Would you bring your field glass? An hour or so later, I found myself settled into the corner of a first-class carriage, flying along toward Exeter, while Holmes, his sharp, eager face framed by his ear-flapped traveling cap, worked rapidly through the bundle of fresh papers he'd bought at the station. We left reading well behind us before he finally thrust the last of them under his seat and offered me his cigar case. You formed a theory then? I asked. At least I've got hold of the essential facts of the case, he said. I'll go through them with you, since nothing clarifies a matter so much as stating it aloud to someone else, and I can hardly expect your cooperation if I don't first show you exactly where we're starting from. Silver Blaze, he began, comes from excellent stock and carries as brilliant a record as his lineage would suggest. He's in his 5th year now and has brought Colonel Ross every major prize that turf has to offer. Right up until the tragedy, he was the clear favorite for the Wessex Cup, with the betting running 3-1 on him, and he'd never once disappointed the public that backed him, so that even at those odds, enormous sums had been wagered. It's obvious then that a great many people had a very strong interest in ensuring Silver Blaze never made it to the starting flag. That fact was well understood at King's Pyland, where the Colonel's stables are located, and every reasonable precaution had been taken to guard the horse. The trainer, John Straker, was a retired jockey who'd once ridden in the Colonel's colors before he grew too heavy for the weighing chair. He'd served the Colonel 5 years as jockey and 7 more as trainer, and had always shown himself entirely honest and devoted. Beneath him worked 3 stable lads, since the whole establishment was a small one, holding only 4 horses in total. One lad sat up each night on watch, while the other 2 slept in the loft above. Straker himself, a married man with no children, lived in a small villa some 200 yards from the stables, kept 1 maid, and was comfortably situated. The surrounding country was very lonely, though half a mile north sat a small cluster of villas built for invalids seeking clean Dartmoor air, and roughly 2 miles in the other direction stood a second, larger training establishment at Mapleton, managed by a man named Silas Brown. Beyond that, the moor was near total wilderness, home to nothing but a few wandering gypsies. On the night in question, the horses had been exercised and watered as usual, and the stables locked at 9. 2 of the lads walked up to the trainer's house for supper, while the third, a boy named Ned Hunter, stayed on watch. Shortly after 9, the maid Edith Baxter carried his supper down to him, a dish of curried mutton, along with nothing to drink, since there was a water tap in the stables and it was the rule that the lad on duty drink nothing else. Edith was still 30 yards from the stables, carrying her lantern through the dark, when a man stepped out of the shadows and called for her to stop. In the yellow circle of lantern light, she saw a gentlemanly figure in a grey tweed suit and cloth cap, carrying a heavy stick with a weighted knob, his face notably pale, his manner nervous. He asked where he was, and when she told him he was near the King's Pylon stables, he seemed delighted, and asked whether the stable boy was alone on duty that night. He produced a small folded paper from his waistcoat and asked her to see that the boy got it that evening, promising her the prettiest dress money could buy in exchange. Frightened by his intensity, she ran past him toward the window where she normally handed through the meals. Hunter was seated inside, and she'd only begun telling him what had happened when the stranger appeared again at the window himself, greeting Hunter directly, the corner of that same paper packet visible in his closed hand. He asked whether the two favorites for the Wessex Cup, Silver Blaze and Bayard, were genuinely as the betting suggested, and offered to make it worth Hunter's while for the straight information. "You're one of those damned touts," Hunter shouted, then sprang up to loose the stable dog. The girl fled to the house, glancing back to see the stranger still leaning through the window. When Hunter came out moments later with the hound, the man was gone, and though Hunter searched all around the buildings, he found no trace of him. About a quarter-mile from the stables, Straker's overcoat was found draped across a furze bush. Just beyond it lay a shallow, bowl-shaped hollow in the moor, and at the bottom of that hollow, the trainer's body. His skull had been shattered by a savage blow from some heavy weapon, and a long, clean cut ran across his thigh, evidently inflicted by something very sharp. Clearly he had fought back, since his right hand still gripped a small knife, clotted with blood to the handle, while his left hand clutched a red and black silk cravat, which the maid immediately recognized as belonging to the stranger from the window. Hunter, once he'd recovered from what proved to be a drugged super, confirmed the cravat's owner as well, and was equally certain the same man had drugged his mutton while standing at that window. Marks in the mud confirmed the missing horse had been present during the struggle, though from that morning he had entirely vanished, and despite every gypsy on the moor being questioned and a substantial reward offered, no word of him had come. An analysis afterward confirmed powdered opium in the remains of the stable lad's supper, while the same dish eaten by the household that night had caused no ill effects at all. Those, Holmes told me, were the bare facts, stripped of surmise. The police had, upon arrival, promptly located and arrested the man on whom suspicion naturally rested. His name was Fitzroy Simpson, a man of good birth and education who had squandered his fortune on the turf and now made a living as a quiet, genteel bookmaker among the London sporting clubs. His betting book showed £5,000 registered against the favourite. Upon arrest, he freely admitted having come to Dartmoor hoping for inside information about the King's Pylon horses and about Desborough, the second favourite, trained at Mapleton, but denied any sinister purpose. Confronted with the cravat, he had gone pale and been unable to explain its presence in the dead man's grip. His clothing showed he'd been out in the storm that night, and his walking stick, a lead-weighted penning lawyer, was exactly the sort of weapon capable of inflicting Straker's wounds. Against this, however, he bore no wound himself, while the state of Straker's own knife suggested at least one of his attackers should carry some mark from the encounter. "There you have it, in a nutshell, Watson," Holmes finished, "and if you can shed any light on it, I'd be very grateful indeed." I offered a thought of my own, that perhaps the cut on Straker's thigh had come from his own knife. During the convulsive movements, that sometimes follow a severe head injury. More than possible, Holmes said. Probable, even. And if that's true, one of the strongest points in Simpson's favor disappears entirely. I confessed I still didn't fully grasp what theory the police were actually working from. Whatever theory we construct, Holmes admitted, has serious problems attached to it. The police apparently imagined that Simpson, having drugged the boy and somehow obtained a duplicate key, opened the stable and let the horse out, intending to kidnap him entirely. His bridle is missing, so Simpson must have fitted it himself. Leaving the door open behind him, he was leading the horse across the moor when Straker either met or overtook him. A struggle followed. Simpson beat out the trainer's brains with his stick without taking any injury from Straker's small knife, and either led the horse to some hidden location afterward or lost him during the fight, leaving him now wandering the moor somewhere. That is the case as the police see it, and improbable as it sounds, every alternative I've considered seems even less likely. Still, I expect to test the whole thing quickly enough once we're actually on the ground, and until then, I don't see how we can advance our position much further. It was evening by the time we reached the small town of Tavistock, sitting like the boss of a shield in the middle of Dartmoor's great circle. Two men were waiting for us at the station. A tall, fair man with a lion's mane of hair and beard and startlingly pale blue eyes, and a small, neat, alert figure in a frock coat and gaiters, trim side whiskers, and eyeglass fixed in one eye. The second man was Colonel Ross. The first, Inspector Gregory, a rising name in the detective service. "I'm delighted you've come down, Mr. Holmes," the colonel said. "The inspector here has done everything anyone could reasonably suggest, but I want no stone left unturned, both to avenge poor Straker and to recover my horse." "Any fresh developments?" Holmes asked. "Very little progress to report, I'm sorry to say," Gregory told him. "We have an open carriage waiting, and since you'll likely want to see the scene before the light fails, we can talk it over as we drive." We rattled through the old Devonshire town together, Gregory pouring out a steady stream of theory, while Holmes threw in the occasional question. Colonel Ross sat with his arms folded and his hat tilted forward, saying little. Gregory's reasoning, I noticed, ran almost exactly along the lines Holmes had already sketched for me on the train. "The net is drawn fairly close around Fitzroy Simpson," Gregory said. "I believe myself he's our man, though I'll grant the evidence remains circumstantial, and some new development could still upset it." "And Straker's knife?" Holmes asked. "We've concluded he wounded himself in the fall. My friend Dr. Watson suggested exactly that on our way down," Holmes said, "which would work against Simpson's guilt, if true." "Undoubtedly," Gregory agreed. "He has neither knife nor wound on him. Still, the case against him is strong. He had every interest in the figure's disappearance. He's suspected of drugging the stable boy. He was out in the storm, armed with a heavy stick, and his cravat was found in the dead man's hand. I think we have quite enough for a jury." Holmes shook his head slowly. "Any competent counsel would tear that apart," he said. "Why lead the horse out of the stable at all, if he wished to harm it there directly? Was any duplicate key ever found on him? Which chemist sold him the opium? And above all, where could a stranger to this district possibly hide a horse, particularly a horse like this one?" We'd reached a neat little red brick villa by then, and climbed out to examine the contents of Straker's pockets, laid out by Gregory across the sitting room table. Among the ordinary items, a watch, some coins, a pipe, a few receipted bills, sat one object that immediately caught Holmes's attention: a small, delicate knife with an ivory handle marked with the surgical maker's name, the kind used for the most precise operations in medicine, entirely unsuited to a rough walk across open moor. And one further paper caught his eye: a milliner's account made out to a William Derbyshire for a costume costing over 20 guineas. Mrs. Straker, when asked, explained that Derbyshire was a friend of her husband's, whose letters were sometimes addressed to their house. Madame Derbyshire had rather expensive tastes, Holmes murmured, setting the bill aside. As we left the sitting room, Mrs. Straker herself intercepted us in the passage, her face haggard and thin, stamped with recent horror. "Surely," Holmes said to her gently, "I met you at a garden party in Plymouth some time ago. You wore a costume of dove-colored silk, trimmed with ostrich feather." "No, sir," she said. "You're mistaken. I've never owned such a dress." "Ah," Holmes said quietly. "That settles it entirely." Colonel Ross glanced at his watch, showing some impatience at Holmes's quiet, methodical pace. "I wish you'd come back with me, Inspector," he said. "There are several points I'd like your opinion on, particularly whether we owe it to the public to withdraw our horse's name from the cup entries." "Certainly not," Holmes said at once, with real decision. "I'd let the name stand." The colonel bowed, thanked him for his opinion, and said we'd find him at Straker's house once our walk was finished, ready to drive back into Tavistock together. He and the inspector turned back, while Holmes and I walked slowly out across the moor. The sun was beginning to sink behind the Mapleton stables. The long, sloping plain in front of us tinged gold, deepening into rich, ruddy browns, where the faded ferns caught the evening light. None of it seemed to touch my companion, sunk as he was in thought. "It's this way, Watson," he said eventually. "Let's set aside for the moment who killed John Straker and focus purely on what became of the horse. Suppose he broke free during or after the struggle. Where would he go? A horse is a gregarious creature by instinct. Left to himself, he'd naturally return either to King's Pyland or make his way to Mapleton. Why would he wander wild across open moor instead? Someone would surely have spotted him by now. And why would gypsies take him? They clear out the moment there's trouble, having no wish to be pestered by police, and they couldn't hope to sell a horse of this fame regardless. It's clear enough. He's not at King's Pyland. Therefore, he must be at Mapleton. Let's take that as our working theory and see where it leads. This part of the moor," he continued, as we walked briskly, "runs hard and dry, but falls away toward Mapleton, and you can see from here a long hollow that would have been very wet on Monday night. If our theory holds, the horse must have crossed it, and that's exactly where we ought to look for tracks." A few minutes brought us to the hollow. Holmes sent me down the right bank while he took the left, and I hadn't gone 50 paces before I heard him shout and saw him waving. A horse's track lay plainly outlined in the soft earth, and the cast shoe he'd pocketed at the crime scene fit the impression exactly. "You see the value of imagination," he said. "It's the one quality Gregory lacks entirely. We imagined what might have happened, acted on the supposition, and found ourselves justified. Let's continue." We crossed the marshy bottom, picked the tracks up again a quarter-mile on, lost them for half a mile, then found them once more near Mapleton itself. Holmes spotted them first, standing with a look of triumph. A man's footprints now ran alongside the horse's. "The horse was alone before," I said. "Quite so, it was. Now what's this?" The double track suddenly turned and headed back toward King's Pyland. Holmes whistled, and we followed, his eyes fixed on the trail, until I happened to glance to one side and noticed the same tracks running back the other direction as well. "One for you, Watson," he said when I pointed it out. "You've saved us a long walk that would only have brought us back over our own path. Let's follow the return track instead." It didn't take us far. The trail ended at the asphalt paving leading to the Mapleton stable gates. A groom came out as we approached. "We don't want loiterers about here," he said. "I only wanted to ask a question," Holmes said, his hand already in his waistcoat pocket. Would it be too early to call Mr. Silas Brown tomorrow morning at 5? Bless you, sir. If any stirring, he will be. He's always first up. But here he is now to answer for himself. A fierce-looking elderly man strode out through the gate, swinging a hunting crop. "What's this, Dawson?" he shouted. "No gossiping. Go about your business. And you, what the devil do you want here?" "10 minutes of your time, my good sir," Holmes said, in sweetest voice imaginable. "I've no time for every gadabout that wanders past. We want no strangers here. Be off, or you'll find a dog at your heels." Holmes leaned forward and said something quietly into the trainer's ear. Brown started violently, flushing to his temples. "It's a lie," he shouted. "An infernal lie." "Very good," Holmes said calmly. "Shall we discuss it here in public or in your parlor?" "Oh, come in if you must." Holmes turned to me with a small smile. "I shan't keep you more than a few minutes, Watson," he said, and followed the trainer inside. 20 minutes passed, the last of the daylight fading into grey, before they reappeared. I have never seen a man so transformed in so short a time. Brown's face had gone ashy pale, sweat bead on his forehead, his hands trembling so badly the crop wagged like a branch in wind. Every trace of his bullying manner had drained away, and he trailed alongside Holmes now like a dog beside its master. "I'll do exactly as instructed," he said. "It shall all be done." "There must be no mistake," Holmes said, glancing back at him. Brown flinched visibly at whatever he read in Holmes's eyes. "No mistake, sir. It shall be there. Should I alter it first, or leave it as is?" Holmes thought a moment, then burst out laughing. "No, don't touch it," he said. "I'll write to you about it. No tricks now, or—" "You can trust me, sir. You can trust me entirely." Holmes turned on his heel without acknowledging the trembling hand Brown offered, and we set off back toward King's Island. A more perfect compound of bully, coward, and sneak than Silas Brown I have rarely encountered, Holmes remarked as we walked. "He has the horse, then?" I asked. "He tried bluster first, but once I described his own movements that morning back to him in exact detail, he became convinced I'd been watching him the entire time. He hadn't noticed, of course, the peculiarly square toes, his own boots leaving their prints, matching exactly what we found on the moor. I told him how, being first up as usual, he'd spotted a strange horse wandering loose, gone out to it, and realized with astonishment, from that white forehead, that chance had delivered into his hands the one horse capable of beating the animal he'd wagered on. I described how his first impulse had been to lead the horse home, and how temptation had shown him instead how he might hide it until the race had passed. Once I'd laid out every detail, he gave up entirely and thought only of saving himself. "But his stables had already been searched," I said. "An old horse fraud like him has more than one trick available," Holmes said. "Aren't you concerned, leaving the horse in his power now, given how much interest he has in seeing it harmed?" "My dear fellow, he'll guard that horse like the apple of his eye. He knows his only hope of leniency now is producing it safely." "Colonel Ross didn't strike me as a man inclined toward much leniency," I said. "The matter no longer rests with Colonel Ross," Holmes said. "I follow my own methods and share exactly as much as I choose. That's the advantage of working unofficially. I don't know if you noticed, Watson, but the Colonel's manner toward me has been just slightly cavalier. I'm inclined to have a little quiet amusement at his expense. Say nothing to him about the horse." "And this is all a minor point," I said, "compared to who actually killed John Straker." "You'll devote yourself to that, then?" I asked. "On the contrary," he said, "we are both going back to London on tonight's train." I was thunderstruck. We'd be in Devonshire only a few hours. and that he'd abandon an investigation begun so brilliantly seemed incomprehensible to me. He said not another word until we'd reached the trainer's house again, where the colonel and inspector were waiting. "My friend and I are returning to town on the night express," Holmes announced. "We've had a charming little breath of your beautiful Dartmoor air." The inspector's eyes went wide. The colonel's lip curled into something close to a sneer. "So you despair of catching poor Straker's murderer," he said. "There are certainly serious difficulties in the way," Holmes said, with a small shrug. "Though I have every hope your horse will start on Tuesday as planned. And I'd ask that you have your jockey ready. Might I have a photograph of Mr. Straker?" The inspector handed one across from an envelope. "You consider this important?" he asked. "Exceedingly so," Holmes said. "My dear Gregory, you anticipate all my needs. If you'd wait here a moment, I have a question for the maid." Once Holmes had left the room, Colonel Ross turned to me, his manner blunt. "I confess I'm rather disappointed in our London consultant," he said. "We seem no further along than when he arrived." I was about to say something in Holmes's defense when he returned. "Now, gentlemen," he said, "I'm quite ready for Tavistock." As we climbed back into the carriage, one of the stable lads held the door for us. Holmes leaned forward on sudden impulse and touched the boy's sleeve. "You keep a few sheep in the paddock," he said. "Who looks after them?" "I do, sir." "Noticed anything wrong with them lately?" "Well, sir, not much to speak of, though 3 of them have gone lame recently." I could see Holmes was genuinely delighted, chuckling and rubbing his hands together. "A long shot, Watson," he murmured to me, pinching my arm. "A very long shot. Gregory," he called, "let me recommend your attention to this singular epidemic among the sheep. Drive on, coachman." Colonel Ross still wore an expression that made his low opinion of my friend's abilities perfectly clear, but I noticed the inspector's attention had sharpened considerably. "Is there some point you'd wish to draw my attention to?" Gregory asked. "To the curious incident of the dog in the night time," Holmes said. "The dog did nothing in the night time," Gregory said. "That was the curious incident," Holmes replied. 4 days later, Holmes and I were on the train again, bound for Winchester to see the Wessex Cup run. Colonel Ross met us outside the station as arranged, and we drove with him his drag out toward the course. His face was grave, his manner cold. "I've seen nothing of my horse," he said. "I suppose you'd know him at a glance if you saw him," Holmes said. The colonel bristled at that. "I've been on the turf 20 years, he said, and never once been asked such a question. A child knows Silver Blaze, with his white forehead and his mottled off foreleg. At least you have his word that the horse will run," I offered. "Yes, I have his word," the colonel said, with a shrug that suggested he'd rather have had the horse itself. "How's the betting running?" Holmes asked. "That's the curious part of it," the colonel said. "You could have gotten 15 to 1 yesterday, and now you can hardly manage 3 to 1. Holmes said. "Someone knows something." As the drag pulled into the enclosure near the grandstand, I glanced over the race card. 6 horses entered for the Wessex Plate. Silver Blaze listed 4th, black cap, red jacket, Colonel Ross's colors. 5 to 4 against Silver Blaze. The ring roared as we settled in. 5 to 4 against Silver Blaze. "There are the numbers up," I said. "All 6 are there." "All 6, the colonel said, subtly agitated. "Then my horse is running, but I don't see him. My colors haven't passed yet." "Only 5 have gone by," I said. "This must be him." A powerful bay horse swept out from the weighing enclosure as I spoke, cantering past us in the familiar black and red. "That's not my horse," the colonel cried. "That animal hasn't a single white hair on it. What is this you've done, Mr. Holmes?" Well, let's see how he gets on," Holmes said, entirely unbothered, raising my field glass to his eye. "Capital," he said a moment later. An excellent start. There they go, coming round the curve. We had a superb view as the field came up the straight. All 6 horses bunched so tightly together, a carpet could have covered them. The Mapleton yellow showed briefly to the front at the halfway point, but Desborough's effort was spent before they reached us, and the colonel's horse came away with a rush, passing the post a clear 6 lengths ahead of the field, the Duke of Balmoral's Iris, a distant third. "It's my race, at any rate," the colonel said, passing a hand over his eyes, "though I confess I can make neither head nor tail of any of it. Don't you think you've kept up this mystery quite long enough, Mr. Holmes?" "Certainly, Colonel. You shall know everything. Let's go round and look at the horse together." We made our way into the weighing enclosure, admitting only owners and their friends. "Here he is," Holmes said. "You need only wash his face and leg with spirits of wine, and you'll find he's the same old silver blaze as ever." "You take my breath away," the colonel said. "I found him in the hands of a fraud," Holmes said, "and took the liberty of running him exactly as he was sent over. We had the corner of a Pullman car entirely to ourselves that evening, whirling back toward London, and I think the journey passed quickly for both the colonel and myself, listening to Holmes lay out everything that had actually happened at the Dartmoor stables that Monday night. "I confess," he began, "that any theory I'd formed purely from the newspaper accounts was entirely wrong, and yet the true indications were there all along, buried beneath other details that obscured their real meaning. I went down to Devonshire, convinced Fitzroy Simpson was our man, though I could see the case against him wasn't complete. It was in the carriage, just as we reached the trainer's house, that the true significance of that curried mutton finally struck me. You remember I sat there distracted after everyone else had climbed down. I was marveling at how I could possibly have overlooked something so obvious. "I confess even now I don't see how it helps," the colonel admitted. "It was the first link in the whole chain," Holmes said. "Powdered opium is by no means tasteless. The flavor is perceptible, if not unpleasant, and mixed into any ordinary dish, the eater would notice it and likely stop eating. Curry, though, was exactly the medium that could mask that taste entirely. There's no possible way Fitzroy Simpson, a stranger to that household, could have arranged for curry to be served that particular night. It's too monstrous a coincidence to accept that he happened to arrive carrying powdered opium on the one evening a dish capable of disguising it was served. Sorry, Simpson is eliminated, which leaves only Straker and his wife as the two people with any control over what was cooked that night. And the opium was added after the dish was set aside for the stable boy specifically, since everyone else who ate from it suffered no ill effects at all. So which of them had access to that particular portion without the maid noticing? Before answering that question, I'd already grasped the significance of the dog's silence, since one true inference always leads toward others. Simpson's encounter had already told us a dog was kept in those stables, and yet someone had entered, taken out a horse, and the animal hadn't barked loudly enough to wake either of the two lads sleeping in the loft above. Clearly, whoever came that night was someone the dog knew well. By then, I was already convinced, or nearly convinced, that John Straker himself had gone down in the dead of night and lit Silver Blaze out. For what purpose? A dishonest one, certainly, or why else drug his own stable boy? I couldn't yet say what that purpose actually was, and hoped the contents of his pockets might help form a conclusion. And they did. You recall the singular knife found in his dead hand. A knife no sane man would ever choose as a weapon. It was, as Watson confirmed, an instrument used for the most delicate surgical operations. And it was meant for a delicate operation that night. With your considerable experience on the turf, Colonel, that it's possible to nick the tendon in a horse's leg with the smallest incision, done subcutaneously, leaving no visible trace whatsoever. A horse treated this way develops a slight lameness, easily blamed on strain or a touch of rheumatism, never on deliberate harm. Villain, the colonel said. Scoundrel. Here we have the explanation for why Straker needed to take the horse out onto open moor at all. So spirited a creature would have woken the soundest sleeper the moment it felt that blade. The operation had to happen outdoors. I've been blind, the colonel said. That's why he needed the candle, why he struck the match. Exactly. But examining his belongings, I was fortunate enough to uncover not only his method, but his motive as well. As a man of the world, Colonel, men don't generally carry other people's bills around in their pockets. Most of us have quite enough trouble settling our own. I concluded at once that Straker was leading a double life, maintaining a second household somewhere, and the nature of that particular bill told me there was a woman involved, one with expensive tastes. However generous you may be with your staff, one can hardly expect a trainer's salary to cover 20 guinea walking dresses. I tested Mrs. Straker with an invented story about a dress she claimed never to have owned, confirmed the garment had never reached her at all, and made note of the milliner's address, intending to call there with Straker's photograph and settle the question of the mythical William Derbyshire once and for all. From that point, everything became clear. Straker had led the horse out to a hollow where his light couldn't be seen from any distance. Simpson, fleeing earlier that evening, had dropped his cravat, and Straker had picked it up, perhaps with some vague idea of using it to secure the horse's leg during the procedure. Once in the hollow, he'd positioned himself behind the animal and struck a light. The horse, startled by the sudden glare, and sensing with that peculiar animal instinct that something was wrong, lashed out, and the steel shoe caught Straker full across the forehead. He'd already removed his overcoat, despite the rain, in order to work more free, and as he fell, his own knife gashed his thigh. Does that make it clear? Wonderful, the colonel said. Wonderful. You might have been standing there yourself. My final piece of reasoning, I confess, was a considerable stretch, Holmes admitted. It struck me that a man as careful as Straker wouldn't attempt so delicate a procedure without practicing first. What could he have practiced on? My eyes fell on the sheep in the paddock, and I asked a question that, somewhat to my own relief, proved my guess correct. Once back in London, I called on the milliner myself, who confirmed Straker as an excellent customer under the name Derbyshire, with a dashing wife of notably expensive habits. I have little doubt this woman had run him deeply into debt and driven him, in the end, into this miserable scheme. You've explained everything but one thing, the colonel said. Where was the horse? Ah, Holmes said. He bolted and was cared for by one of your own neighbors. I think we ought to declare an amnesty on that particular point. This is Clapham Junction, if I'm not mistaken, and we'll be into Victoria within 10 minutes. If you'd care to smoke a cigar in our rooms, Colonel, I'll be glad to fill in whatever other details interest you.